Right, let me tell you, China, my God, they need saving from the West. They need saving from the oppression and the dictatorship that they live in, according to Mike Pompeo anyway.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Barrett channel today. We are here in Beijing, in the Forbidden City, which is one of the central, most important landmarks in China, actually. So enjoy us walking around and showing you the area whilst we chat about this topic. On the Barrett channel, we do videos all about China, factories, opinion pieces, talking about society, taking you traveling around China. So subscribe if you're into that. Anyway.
So, not so long ago, Mike Pompeo made a statement that says we continue to strive to make the people of China's lives better. And for anybody who's spent any time in China, they will know that that is the most ridiculous statement anyone could ever make. You know, it's like it's almost trying to say to Western people that Chinese people live this sort of life where they're not free to do anything, or you know, the government controls everything they do. They're unhappy. They're not happy with their government, and the reality of it is very, very different, isn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, but before I came here, I will absolutely say I came here with the presumption that there was an underlying unhappiness in all of the people here. That was my impression that I was given about China from the media.
Okay.
And which is quite odd. You would come in. The first time you came to China was 2008. You never stopped talking about China when you were back in England.
Yeah.
Yet that was still my impression before I came here. So it's indoctrination.
Okay, so you say that, and since you've spent like probably the best part of 18 months, 2 years here now, how do you now think about that?
I think it's quite funny that that's what I used to think, because it seems like the vast majority of people are actually, I'm not going to say better, but live just as nice quality of life, if not better in a lot of cases, than we are used to back in England and in much of the Western world. And a lot of that comes down to the simple things of life and not that expensive. And you've got there's not really a big issue with safety. Let me touch on those points separately.
Yeah.
So even if you're not on a great whacking wage, you can afford to do things like travel back to your hometown because transportation is not that expensive. You can afford to eat out because you can eat at cheaper places. You can eat out on the regular. You can afford to go out with your friends and have a drink. Whereas these simple things are very expensive to do.
Yeah, I mean,
in England.
I think this statement that Pompeo sort of makes, it comes down to the fact that Western societies can't accept that China has a different way of doing things. They seem to be under this impression that their style of democracy needs to be a universal, worldwide thing, and they can't accept that somewhere is different. Now, if you look at China over the last 40 years, the advancements in China are unparalleled anywhere in the world. You know, they've come from a relatively poor country that were, I wouldn't say backwards, but very, very underdeveloped, to one of the sort of worldwide powerhouses in economic and technology terms.
And wealth.
And I think if you speak to a majority, in fact there was a survey done by, I think it was Harvard University, where they went to different countries and they surveyed the people of their sort of perception of their government.
Oh yeah.
And I think it was around 90% of the people in China were happy and satisfied with their government. And I can understand that, because if you look at what over the last 30 or 40 years, but potentially really more so in the last 10 to 15 years, what the government have given the people here in terms of infrastructure, in terms of quality of life, in terms of standard of living, it is absolutely unparalleled anywhere. You know, a lot of the Western countries, standard of living has pretty much stood still for the last 10 to 15 years. You know, it hasn't really been, and in a lot of cases, it's actually gone backwards. Because the wages haven't risen, the cost of living have skyrocketed. Where here, as Ollie alluded to just a minute ago, just something as simple as travel here is absolutely cheap compared to many Western countries. And that's because Chinese government do things for the people. It's not about making profit out of things, out of services. They're put there and provided for the people. And you know, I get the feeling when I first came to China, I got the feeling that a lot of Chinese people thought like America was like amazing, you know.
A lot of them still do.
But I actually think in the last 4 years since the administration's been in China, you know, a lot in the news, and you see, I think this coronavirus has been a turning point.
That's been massively highlighted everything.
You know, it's highlighted the what
flaws
Chinese people perceive to be the flaws in a democracy. You know, on the TV they've seen rioting, they've seen people protesting, they've seen governments fighting, you know, different parties fighting with each other. They've seen a president who's tried to sort of rig an election, you know, and it goes on and on and on. And I think a lot of people now looking at America and thinking, thank God we've got our government.
Right, it just I find it's almost an impossible task to try to change the minds of people who have never been here. It's really a monumental task. I mean, I put an Instagram story up the other day on my personal Instagram account talking about, and it was a quote about how when China first started locking down because of coronavirus, the West shouted about human rights issues, and now a year later they're still in lockdowns. There's, you know, hundreds of thousands dead, and people have shut up about the human rights issues now. And someone that I used to be very close friends with a long time ago replied saying something along the lines of, yeah, but that's where the virus came from. Of course they're gonna listen to the government when they're living under a dictatorship. And I just sighed like, oh man, it's just a real lack of understanding. And she's obviously another one who thinks that the Chinese people are just forced to do things because they're living under this really oppressive society, where in fact they just live in a different way. They have a different mindset. But if you've never been here, it's really hard to understand that. Hello.
Hi. I think one of the things that is levelled at China from the West is this word freedom.
Yeah.
So they say, you know, Chinese have got no freedom of speech. But if you define freedom of speech as criticising your government, then yeah, China, you would say, has no freedom of speech, because it's a problem to criticise your government here. But when you speak to Chinese people, they go, well, why would you want to criticise our government?
Yeah.
They really don't see that as a thing at all, do they?
No, that's some people might think that's because they are scared to do it. But that's not because they're scared to do it. That's because they actually don't want to, because there's no need to. They don't feel like that. It's kind of it's a quite a comical thing actually to have that as have that as ammunition, saying, oh, you can't criticise your government, when that's not something they actually want to do anyway.
I think it's this down in Chinese culture. You respect your elders and you respect your leaders. So I feel in China, by a majority of people, not all of the people, there's always going to be people with a different opinion, but I think a majority of the people here respect their government and respect what the government try to do for them. And people will argue that, oh, you know, policies are just forced on the people. Well, they're actually not. You know, there's a number of mechanisms where where people can challenge the government, you know, through I'm not familiar with all the ins and outs, but you can lodge complaints and they collect sort of information, you know, they monitor social media to see if policies. And another thing they do, when they bring a new policy, they won't roll it out all across China. What they will do, they will trial it in a certain city or a certain province, and then if it's popular and it works and it does well, they will roll it out across the rest of China. If it doesn't, they won't. And I just want to mention, because
Slow down a bit, take a breath.
yeah, I just want to mention something, because I want to sort of do a lead into another video I want to do in the future about the social credit system. So, social credit system was sort of trialled in a number of cities, and you know, it wasn't taken on board. A lot of the things that I talked about in the West weren't taken on board because they just trialled them. And this is what happens a lot in the sort of policy here in China, is that they will trial things. They won't implement it right across. Oh shit, it doesn't work.
What, you know, one thing that actually explains it very well. And shout out to Cyrus Jansen, great YouTube channel. On his recent video is a lecture. It was I don't know if he pulled this quote from somewhere else or not, but it was, in China you can't change the party, but you can change the policy. And in the West you can change the party, but it's very, very difficult to change the policy, because there's always a political football between the two parties, and if one of them doesn't like it, then they'll do everything in their power to stop that from happening, or when they eventually get into power, they'll cancel those original plans. Whereas in China, they're very forward thinking, and no one's there to say no, you can't put that policy into place. So they're always adapting, they're always ready for the next move, they're always thinking 10 years down the line, and that has allowed them to get to this place where they are today, where a lot of the Chinese people can be very proud of their country's system.
You know, that's something, because they haven't got this sort of changing parties every 4 or 5 years. There's more stability and long-term planning. And just before we finish up, I just want to get back to this sort of thing about freedom. Now, freedom to many people means a lot of different things. So you'll have, you know, Chinese people, they value the freedoms of being able to walk around in cities, feeling safe, being able to travel very inexpensively. And they see that on the other side of the coin, not being free, is being worried about going out into a city that you might get mugged or shot, or there might be, you know, you get involved in riots. So this thing about, you know, freedom, it's very different depending on which side of the fence you're on.
A good example of that is guns. You know, a lot of Americans stand by that amendment of, you know, you should have the freedom to have a gun, and that's fine. But people here might perceive that as, why would I want to have the freedom to have a gun when that means that I have less safety? So they are okay to sacrifice that bit of freedom, because then that gives them a different kind of freedom, which is safety. So it's just, if you only stand on the perspective of one side, you'll never ever open your eyes to how other people might see it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's down to this thing that, you know, I think Western countries have got to stop thinking that the democratic system that they have has to be something that everywhere else around the world adopts. Just leave China alone to do its own thing. It's working for them, and the people are very, very happy with it.
Just a last point as well, actually, is it's kind of pushed into the Western narrative that China wants to overtake the world. They want
that's just so funny.
They want to sort of push their systems into other countries, but actually it's not like that at all. They really, really don't give a shit about what other countries are doing. They do them, and you know, that's that they grow their internal market, and that's all they need to do. They're not worried about spending you know, massive amounts on military budgets to you know, go into other countries. They're not doing that.
Yeah, well, that's to say, that's the only statistic you got to look at. How many countries have China tried to force regime change on? Kind of none. How many countries of America and its allies in the West tried to force regime change on? Numerous.
On that note, I'm sure this will muster up a lot of conversation in the comments, so do let us know. Even if we don't reply to them all, we definitely, either one of us, reads it. So thank you very much. Like this video if you enjoy these walk and talks and you want us to show you more places around China. As always, for now,
Take care.